think just about everyone on here knows me or has met me. I'm a nurse or a technician at New Bolton Center. Been here 1 or 2 or 22 years, but who counts? That's where I am now. I just got off shift. And then tonight we're going to talk about just some, safety gear for horse and rider, and a little bit of stable management, and what to do in case of like an emergency or a fire. So as always, I think this just is a good way to encourage group discussion. My way isn't the only way. There are several different ways, and I think we can all share our ideas and help each other out. But I'm going to share my screen. So stable care for and health and safety. I chose this background so that we can all think of cooler days, which I think this is going to be a nicer week. So as we go through, I think it's important to, think of the environment of your barn or stable area. I think it's really important to focus on cleanliness. And if anyone's like me, the barn's usually cleaner than my house. I enjoy sweeping, enjoy spending time there. It's at least tidy. But you do want to keep it tidy. Keeping dust and debris down is only going to help our respiratory system, but also help the respiratory system of horses that are in the barn for more than a quick visit. You want to keep them healthy. So a good, well-ventilated barn. If the weather's nice, try and keep the doors open, keep windows open. You want to have a lot of air circulating through your barn. You want to avoid stagnant water. Stagnant water can pose a lot of different threats, if you want to call it, to our stable, our barn. It's a lot of mosquitoes like to harbor around water sources, so you can have issues with everything from West Nile virus to Potomac horse fever. So if you have any areas that pool with water, you want to try and correct that, or try and keep like a squeegee or a broom for keeping water cleaned out. In areas where you're going to store your hay, your grain, or if your horses are eating grain from the ground, you just want to make sure to clean up those areas and remove any dropped grain to avoid that getting moldy and having someone pick it up, and just cleaning out old hay beds before putting new hay down. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily look bad, but it gets nasty and moldy. And, speaking from a pony person, sometimes they will get desperate and eat whatever they can find, even though it's not usually their first choice. And then also keeping the barn, especially the barn aisleway, safe, keeping rakes and pitchforks and everything up and out of the way. First of all, those things are usually a hazard to myself, but also a hazard. You never know when a horse is going to spook coming in and out of the aisleway, and they could end up injuring themselves. I've seen a few incidents, even happen in the hospital where you have a horse get spooked, and it's really helped us to minimize what we have, especially in high work areas, so that they're not going to get spooked, back up, bump into a cart, bump into a shovel, bump into something that could potentially hurt them. So you want to kind of keep the area as clean and open as possible, and just, keep mucking tools, keep things like that out of the way. Because we all know if there's that one thing that's in the aisle that could poke one of these horses or scratch them, their legs will find it. And then also the last thing, which isn't necessarily physical environment, but keeping things low stress, which is going to help the health of your animal in lots of different ways, especially in ways that we don't perceive stress. So horses tend to internalize a lot of their stress, especially with like gastric ulcers. So they may seem fine or unstressed in the way that we might show our stress, but just a change in the routine, change in timing could upset their system. So if you have a routine, everyone comes in together, or keep like animals coming in groups, that does cut down on their stress, which kind of coincides with the environment. And like I said, if anyone has any comments as we're going through this, please, just jump up and I don't see all of you on my screen now, so I can read my slides, but feel free to chime in or pop up with a chat and we can stop and discuss. Because a lot of these, I followed the guidelines for the CAA topics. Some of it's very rudimentary, but I just wanted to be thorough and put it all on here. When we think of stall care, some people just think of it as mucking, but you can also break it down into mucking, picking, stripping, and it also depends on how long the animal is going to be in a stall. This picture here is my little pony, Duncan, the only non-driving pony I have, who lost a ton of weight. Turns out he has ulcers, and he has to be in so I can catch him to medicate him, because once again, he's a pony. But with his stall, since he is in most of the day, except for when I'm cleaning his stall, I'm going to do a very thorough mucking. I'm going to clean out all of his urine spots, going to clean out all of his manure, really check under the surface and do a good cleaning. Whereas if I have time and I'm there, if I have time in the morning when I check on him, I might pick through it. So it might not be a thorough cleaning, but I'm going to remove large piles of manure. I might pick up a wet spot, just enough to keep him comfortable. And then there's stripping, which this I tend, once again, it kind of depends on the animal. Oh, I do see a message about quarantining. We can talk about that. I think that comes up in one of my other slides, so I will touch on that, Stephanie. So stripping at least once a week, and that's really just pulling all of the bedding out, doing a thorough cleaning. Even what I like to do is move the horse to a different stall or let the horse have a little bit of turnout time and really rake it up and clean it out. So that's kind of my breakdown of those definitions. I'm on slides. I don't know why my slides don't want to work. There we go. So we talk about cleaning the stall. I also wanted to talk about bedding. There are lots of different bedding options out there, and some that are, I think, getting a little more popular now. Of course, like down at the bottom, there's your traditional straw bedding, your shavings, but a lot of people are also using these, like the wood pelleted bedding. And then up here in the top left-hand corner is recycled cardboard. We switched from shavings to recycled cardboard in the hospital as an alternative to straw several years ago. It's really nice because it is biodegradable, and the companies that pick up hay for the mushroom growers to compost the hay will also pick up the recycled cardboard. So that is nice from a disposal standpoint. And I don't know if they'll pick up solely cardboard, but they do pick up a cardboard straw mix. So I would just talk to, if you're working with a company that does come and pick up and pay for your waste hay, you can ask them about that. So I kind of broke it down, and it depends on where you're getting your bedding from, but your straw might be the more economical, especially because for disposal, you may get paid a small fee by companies that can reuse that. The one con is that straw by itself is not super absorbent, and some horses really like to eat straw, and that can sometimes cause impactions if they eat too much. And it really doesn't have any nutritional value. So it's going to fill them up, but not provide them the nutrients. So, but if they have access to hay, they're not eating it, it works really well. Shavings are a little more absorbable, which is nice. They just can be harder to dispose of. You can get those, what's it called? It's like a dumpster for just shavings. And it's a service where the company will come as often as you need them to, and they will, you know, either swap out trailers or clean out trailers of shavings. If you're in an area where you have a manure spreader and the area to do so, some people will choose to spread their own manure and waste hay and waste bedding or waste straw. So it all kind of depends, once again, on your resources and where you are. These wood pellets are actually really nice. I really like using these wood pellets. They're super absorbable, and it's super easy to clean. I kind of think of this more as like a giant litter box for your horses. So yeah, super easy to clean, very absorbable. And if you have urine spots, if you fluff up those wet spots, they will dry, and you can kind of reuse that bedding, which is nice. The one mild con is that you should prep these pellets. You're not going to just throw the pellets dry into a stall, although some people do use them that way. But usually you will put a bag in a muck tub or in a wheelbarrow, mix with water, which will fluff those pellets up. And then as they dry, they're very nice absorbable bedding. And then cardboard. Cardboard is going to be more expensive just because of the processing. It is nice because you are reusing something. We get our recycled cardboard through an Amish distribution company. They may also be the ones that process it, but there is some commercially available cardboard bedding out there. We use this a lot in our animals that are in for respiratory disease. They might have asthma or allergies. It's a little more low dust and respiratory friendly. Once again, it's biodegradable, but sometimes as it does break down, you do have to watch because sometimes there is a little bit of a layer of dust underneath the cardboard. So sometimes you have to do a little more stripping than, say, if you were using straw. So once again, it can be harder to get, it can be more expensive, but it's kind of one of those specialty niche beddings that you might just use if you had a horse in need. And for some of our laminitis cases, sometimes we will mix the cardboard and the straw together, and that makes a really, really nice cushioned bedding. The cardboard is pretty soft. So does anyone know of any other beddings I may have missed?
This is Margaret. When I worked, at the law firm for all my whole life, I used to drag home shredded paper because they shred everything at the law firm, and they made, like, it was a big firm, and they probably had like 12 big huge bags of shredded paper every day. So I would like take bags of shredded paper home in my Subaru and use that for bedding. It would be like using cardboard.
Yeah,
it was free, except I had to haul it home from work. And but it turned into paper mache sometimes, but it's really absorbent. And you could just like scoop it out, and I compost.
Oh, awesome.
Waste, and it composts really fast.
That's awesome.
Dirt in like a couple of months. But anyway, yeah, shredded law firm paper, and I had a little bit of bling in there from Post-it notes and little plastic sign here notes. But
there you go.
They lived through it. I used it for 15 years, so whatever.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because one of the people I work with actually brings the shredded paper home to put in their chicken coop. So, but yeah, I didn't think it, and she tried to use it with her goats, but her goats would eat it. So she had to stop with that. But yeah, if you have, a small barn, if you have access to a large amount of shredded paper, hey, reuse, recycle.
Yeah, it was great. And then I had a lot of free big plastic bags too.
There you go.
It was great. I was just being, but since I retired, I went back in to get more paper for a long time, but I'm like, you know, this is crazy. So now I'm to a mixture of and shavings.
I have a friend who uses a mixture of ground corn husks and cardboard. I don't know where she gets it, but she says it's cheap.
Ground corn husk and cardboard. Huh. Yeah, I would be interested.
It
Get that.
looks like the corn husk is finely ground. It looks like the pelleted stuff that has been watered.
Treated with water. Huh. Yeah.
It's Cindy Buchanan. You know her.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to ask. Laura talks to her. I'll have to ask her where she gets it.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of different options out there. I mean, you just kind of have to use what's going to fit, you know, the lifestyle of your farm, what's easy for you, easiest for you to work with, what's easiest on your animals. But it's good to know that there are so many different options. Anyone else have any bedding you'd like to share? Okay. Well, I also want to point out, you know, sometimes your bedding is going to be dependent too on what kind of flooring you have, what kind of base you have in your barn. And I've been in a lot of different barns, and some of them are converted from, say, a dairy barn, or some of them are newer barns actually made and intended for horses and show horses. So you could have everything from a concrete floor to sand flooring or just dirt flooring, or you could have something that was built and has integrated mats like shown here. I do think that matting is important if a horse is going to be spending long amounts of time in a stall, especially if they're in stall rest, especially if they're older. Probably the next best thing to mats would be like a sand base or a dirt base. It just gives them more provides more shock absorption for their feet. And that's going to be really important, especially as they're standing. You know, if you're like me, if you're on your feet a lot, your feet definitely, and your legs definitely feel better if you're standing on a cushioned surface rather than standing on concrete all day or asphalt. So now when you do use some of these organic bases, I'll say, you know, dirt and sand, sometimes it's a little harder to eradicate bacteria, which in your average farm, like, you know, your backyard farm, your small show farm, it may not be a huge issue, but in some of these larger show barns where horses might be coming and going for training, or certainly if it's a quarantine facility, or if you've got a large breeding operation, sometimes bugs can get in there and can be hard to get rid of. And I will talk in a minute about what you can use to treat that with, but yeah. And then another consideration that I thought about is if you do have sand as the base in your stall, I'd be really careful to like feed hay in a net, feed, you know, your grain in a bucket off the ground, not in a feed pan, because you don't want them to drop their feed and accidentally eat some of that sand with the grain. Sand is heavy, it likes to sit in their colon, and sometimes it can lead to an impaction. Mats, like you can get stalls that you customize with matting, which is, you know, tacked into the stall, or you can, you know, buy mats in different thicknesses that you can, you know, come up with a big rectangle or a square in the center of your stall. They even have these nice mats that kind of click together, so you don't have to worry about doing a whole lot of work. So these are nice options if horses are going to be staying in long term. They can be hard to move around. Even the thin ones can be super heavy. And then also, like with the concrete hard surfaces, I would highly recommend matting or filling dirt on top of the concrete surface. But if you have an area where, you know, horses might just be coming into a stall to eat and then going back out, the concrete might not be a bad idea. It's easy to clean, especially if you have a lot of different animals coming and going from that area. So just something to be mindful of, you know, your footing. And you can get, like I said, there are lots of different types of mats. You can get some that are fairly inexpensive, or you can go the full gamut and get customized matting for your stalls. The other thing, which we're a little bit of a specific niche, but we do have epoxy poured flooring in a lot of our stalls here, because we have to have that balance of, we have to be able to clean all of our stalls between patients, and we want it to be good traction footing. So the poured epoxy is the best fit for us. And then if something does have special consideration and needs more sole cushion, we can bring in, we use a pretty thick 1/2-inch orthopedic mat, like kind of almost like a gym mat. So any comments on flooring? Does anyone have anything that they like or don't like? Or
Yeah, this is Lydia, and I have been mucking with, believe it or not, a snow shovel for probably 3 years, and I love it because it gets my rubber matting so clean.
Nice.
Versus a fork where everything falls through. And even urine, when it pools in a certain spot, maybe on the mat, I can even scoop it up. Nice. And throw it out the door. Yeah. So
what kind of matting do you have? Do you have?
It's very tight and was professionally put in.
Okay.
So I don't have big seams or anything that I catch on. So the snow shovel just goes right over top of everything. Just
that's nice.
Smooth as can be.
Yeah.
And I've done it maybe now 3 years, and it's just, everything is so much cleaner.
Lydia, Mickey used to use a snow shovel too.
And then in addition, I'm so loaded working at a bank with the shredding. And that, the white paper shredding absorbs, and I just throw it out in the field. I mean, it's just so biodegradable. It just absorbs. And it's very thin and fine.
Yeah. You and Margaret have something going there. You can start selling that on the side.
Yeah. So it really worked out well.
Good. Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many different types out there. You just have to find what's going to work best, you know, for your animals in your barn.
Yeah, I have sand flooring in a shed. They don't have stalls. They're in a big shed. And I have hay nets, but I still put a mat under the hay nets because of course they're going to pull out, you know, hay and drop it, and then they're going to eat it off the ground. So that way I have these mats underneath of the hay. So they're still eating the hay off of a mat, even though it's a sand floor.
So I think everyone's like well, my horse isn't eating sand, but I'm like, well, like if they're eating anything off the ground, they're going to inadvertently get it. So.
Yeah, I learned a lot about sand. I had no idea it was that detrimental to a horse. Yeah. But we have none around us, but I'm certainly going to be careful around sand.
Yeah, I had a friend whose pony just typically would ingest, they didn't have sand in the stalls, but just out in the pasture, the sand, it was a sandy ground. Yeah. And she got an impaction colic, and they said it was sand.
Yeah. Yeah, you tend to see it a lot in like, yeah, the minis or the ponies that are on dry lots, and in some areas that dry lot might be a sand arena. Certainly down
Yeah,
by the beaches and the shores and some of the coastal lines. It's just there's so much sand in the soil, and if they're out there grazing, which there are supplements
sure.
like the sand clear that you can give, which is essentially psyllium or like a metamucil type fiber, and that goes in and kind of forms like a gel and helps to carry the sand out of the colon. But the sand is it ends up getting very heavy and just sits down low in their colon, and they can get pretty uncomfortable, and sometimes you can't get it out just by tubing them and trying to push it through. Sometimes they need surgery to, you know, to flush that out.
Wow,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. It's
Thank you for
amazing.
mentioning that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I see a lot, so I have lots of little interjections. So, okay, and then just a few more tidbits to mention. You know, during your daily cleaning, it's a good idea to remove all manure. It's also going to keep your pests down, you know, like flies or insects. Try and remove urine spots, and just like, you know, the woman who's fluffing the bedding in this picture, try and work through it, because sometimes you won't necessarily see the urine on top of the bedding. Sometimes it soaks down. If there's any, I don't necessarily remove all uneaten hay, but certainly soiled hay that they have pulled into the center of their stall, I would remove that. Old grain really isn't a thing. I think if, you know, unless they're older horses that are eating a mostly like a complete grain diet, like living on equine senior, most horses should eat their meal when offered. But if there is anything left over, you just want to dispose of that daily. And then when you're giving them new hay, you can, I always, every animal is different when it's in a stall, and they all kind of have, well, you've got horses that have one spot where they always urinate and defecate. They're very neat and tidy. And then you have some animals that are just a total pig pen. But if you know that they have certain areas where they're most likely to defecate or urinate, you just want to try and keep the hay away from that area. Some people just prefer to feed up in hay nets. Unless you can keep a really good eye on them and you've got your hay net secured up high enough and properly, hay nets really scare me. I've seen horses get stuck in them. The nibble nets are a little bit better. They're really small hay nets. But like I said, as long as they're up and tied appropriately, that's fine. But most horses want to eat off the ground. You know, that's normal for them. But sometimes they have health considerations and they do better eating elevated. And then I just want to emphasize, some people, like, depending on how good the lighting is in your barn, you know, you don't want to just look in and say, oh, their water bucket's still full or it's half full. I'm going to just add water to top it off. I dump buckets and I have a little scrubby, scrub them every day. It's amazing how much residue you can get on the side of your buckets. And we really want to encourage, you know, when it's super hot and even when it's super cold, you really want to encourage drinking, and they do like clean buckets. It's nice if you have time, like if the animal's only on limited, like they're only in a stall during the day or at night, or even if they are on stall rest, try and put them in another stall, or if they can go on small paddock, give their stall a little bit of time to air out. And on those days, especially when I'm completely mucking the stall, I use some of this sweet PDZ. This is, you know, they call it stall refresher, but what it's really doing is neutralizing the ammonia from their urine. So if you've ever walked into a stall where, you know, the animal's been in there a lot or been on stall rest, you know, your eyes start to water. from all the ammonia in their urine. So, and they don't like to breathe that in as well. And it can also be very detrimental to their respiratory tract, can lead to things like asthma and things like that. So there might be other, I'm sure there are other products out there, but this is just a white powder. You just sprinkle it down before you're bedding, and it doesn't have a scent to it, but it does help to neutralize the ammonia. I forget what compound the PDZ is, but does anyone else use anything different than?
I just have a general question.
Sure.
I feel like a Peter, Paul, and Mary song, where have all the flowers gone? But where have all the ticks gone? I've had like 2 ticks all season.
They're still around. I think they were worse earlier in the season, but they are still around. Do you have chickens or guineas or anything around your barn? Because they eat them.
Chickens, but they're not near the barn at all. After we got burnt down by the chickens being in the the heat lamp ignited the bedding and burnt the whole stalls, 7 stalls down.
Oh no, that's horrible.
Yeah, so no chickens near them anymore. But
Oh,
we know you can't leave them loose anyway. There's too much that attacks them.
yeah.
But I can't believe it. I mean, I groom the horses every morning, and there's no ticks
Yeah,
all season.
you're right. There has been, maybe it's because we've had a fairly hot, dry summer overall.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
A good point. This is
Yeah.
Margaret. I haven't seen a tick yet this summer on the dogs or the horses.
Wow.
So,
Oh,
you
I
know,
have a feeling though, as we get into fall, once it starts getting a little cooler, we might start seeing more again.
big kaboom with ticks. Yeah.
Well, it's a good
So
comment.
I use lime. Does anybody, I mean, does anybody have a negativity about lime?
I don't think so. I mean, I know, I do know of other people that use lime. I think it's the same, along the same lines of it's just neutralizing that ammonia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's basically powder. And what I do is I use in the areas that I know are going to be wet, because I know where my horses, go to the bathroom. I use a little of those pellets, and I sprinkle the lime in it, and I use them together, and I throw it down on the bottom. So I'm not liming everything. I'm just sort of lightly liming the pellets where they go, where the urine is.
Yeah, that's really smart, because then you're gonna cut down on that odor and that ammonia almost
It
immediately.
also helps with the flies, because
yeah.
it's the odor that brings the flies. Flies are attracted to the smell of the urine as much as the, manure. Especially if you have a mare, which I do, that urinates a lot. And her stall's always, more bug prone
Yeah,
than the gelding. But
yeah.
just, you wanted comments, so I'm giving them to you.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think
Good.
mares are definitely dirtier than, like, stallions tend to be the neatest. I mean, they're super neat.
Well, my mare is very neat. She goes in the same place. She just can't help the fact that she produces a lot more urine for whatever reason. And it is cyclical, but I mean, sometimes it's a mess.
Yeah.
Enough of that. Nobody wants to hear that.
Oh my. And then someone else was just saying, yeah, pick urine up with the pellets, use barn dry. Oh, and using some simple green. That's a good idea too, based on your flooring. So, and then also maybe the winter was cold enough, or maybe the cicadas ate the ticks.
There you go.
So, but yeah, so with rubber mats, yeah, Simple Green is a wonderful cleaner. My husband learned about Simple Green this year, and he's been cleaning everything in the house with it. Maybe I should invite him to the barn.
Really? No, keep them in the house. That's okay.
I know. He went to the grocery store today. I feel spoiled.
Wow, A+.
Yeah.
So this is great again, but I just have, for bucket cleaning,
Yes.
I use Effordent tabs and Listerine to clean my water buckets. Just a little splash of Listerine in there. I squish it around, so let it soak in there. It kills all the germs, and it's like human proof, right? And
Yeah.
my horses love it, so it's great. And Effordent tabs, I let it soak in there. Everything, I clean up everything. My husband used to work for Pfizer, and we had
Okay.
outdated cases of Effordent.
Oh,
Maybe we'll use them for party favors at the next annual.
there you go. Only if you will know what to use them for. Yeah. No, these are all great ideas, but yeah, I mean, it's like you can't ever be too clean when it comes to things, especially like water troughs, the floor. I mean, some of it might be the environment that I'm in now, working in the hospital, but I mean, like we're almost stripping stalls every day. We're very liberal with how we clean them. The buckets get scrubbed every day. So it's definitely good to have a better environment. So, but okay, so amounts of bedding. This is also going to depend on how long the animals are in, or are you trying to encourage rest while they're in, or is it an older arthritic animal, or are they just in to get a break from the heat, or in to take in some more calories? So, some people will have very lush packs of bedding, like shown in this top picture, where they're banking the bedding up, which is fine. It's a lot to sift through, and by keeping it banked, you're going to pull that banked bedding into the center as you're mucking out the bedding in the center, and then you just add to the walls as you refill. So it's not, you're not mucking all of that out every day. Sometimes you can get away with just a little bit of straw bedding. I found this picture and thought it was cute. Everyone likes their little place to nap. And then it just kind of comes down to personal preference. And horses, even if you put a small amount of bedding in the middle of their stall, which is one of the things that my sister always did at the barn, and I kind of adopted that, of just putting the bedding in a square in the middle or towards the back. They will kick it around and kind of make their own bed, so to say. But it all comes down to personal preference and your how you want to clean and manage your stalls. Let's see. I don't know why there we go. So tools of the trade, which shovel is on here. Looks like we have to add snow shovel. But yeah, certainly with certain streams, you can very easily muck out with a shovel. Now with pitchforks, a lot of times people will use the metal pitchforks with the straw bedding. And then if you have more of the pelleted or the shavings, these plastic forks with closer tines tend to work pretty well. And also if you're working with mats, usually you don't want to use pitchforks because that's just going to be poking holes in your matting, and that bacteria and urine is just going to seep into them and could create problems. But rakes are good. even if you don't rake up everything every day, it's going to get some of the smaller material. And then some people muck into wheelbarrows. Some people have really nice carts on their tractor they can pull through the barn. You might be in a smaller farm where you're just using a muck tub. It all kind of comes down to ease. And then for cleaning out aisleways after you muck, sweeping, which I find sweeping very therapeutic at the end of the day. Some people will use leaf blowers. Here in the hospital, this isn't the type that we have, but they have lots of different vacuums. So every morning after our boys finish mucking the stalls, they go through with a vacuum. But once again, we're in a hospital environment, things have to stay clean and biosecure, so we're less likely to spread bacteria through their manure. Once again, that stall refresher. And then one of the best disinfectants for organic material. So Simple Green's a good cleaner, but bleach is probably one of the best disinfectants. So some of the disinfectants don't necessarily work in the face of organic debris, which is, you know, dirt, manure, urine, but bleach does. So if you have even a dirt floor or a sand floor, a lot of people will just use these like garden sprayers, and you can just make sure that you've got a proper dilution of bleach, but you can spray that on and let it sit, and it will kill some of the bacteria. So, and it's kind of up to how often your stalls are getting used and how soiled. Some people will just do that once every 6 months. It all depends. And that's also something you had asked about quarantining early on in the discussion. Ooh. Sorry, I'm like clicking too many buttons. Sorry, everyone. It's like my first night using Zoom. But we had talked about quarantine stalls. So if you have an animal that came in from an auction or came in from an area that, you know, you didn't know their vaccine history, and you have a quarantine stall, you can certainly clean with bleach after that. Someone was asking how long to quarantine. I forget if I have that slide on here, but minimum, like if you know the vaccine status, if you know where the animal's coming from, I would still say a 2-week quarantine, even if it's just in a paddock away from the rest of your horses. If it's something that's coming from an auction house like New Holland, I would definitely do a 2-week quarantine, and you should get them tested for strangles, but you shouldn't test them for 2 weeks because it could take that long for them to start shedding that bacteria, so, or the virus. The bacteria or a virus like the flu. So minimum 2 weeks, and then you can still disinfect things with bleach. Okay. So once again, following the CAA guidelines for what we should talk about tonight, they did want to touch base on protective gear. Before we get into that, does anyone else have any other comments or anything that you want to add on stall care? It seems like it's fairly basic, but I mean, it is good to get on here and share ideas, and you know, some more people might have access to things like the shredded paper, or you know, might be worth looking into mats or whatnot. But okay, well then I will move on. Really just a review of protective gear. We'll talk about human versus our horses. And a lot of this is stuff that we are wearing every day when we're out driving, riding. Helmets are super, super important. I always cringe even when I see people just trail riding or or then you see people out barrel racing and they don't have a helmet on. I mean, horses can trip as you're just walking around the barn. And I think it's really important to be safe. You know, and if you have a helmet that you've had a fall with, if there's a helmet that's cracked, throw it away and get a new one. It's not worth, you know, that integrity being lost, because with your second fall, you could do pretty extensive damage or you may not be protected. Kind of makes me cringe a little bit when I see helmets, like old helmets show up at, like, you know, equestrian yard sales, or get handed down for little kids to ride at farms. You know, you really want them to be just as protected as everyone else. And if you've got an old helmet, if there's a helmet that's had, you know, a fall or two, you really should just dispose of that helmet. Vests, you know, like, oh my gosh, this never wants to work unless I don't want it to. So vests, you know, kind of like this is kind of like the Tipperary style vest. They have some with airbags. You know, this is great, you know, if you're doing, you know, CDE, if you're going cross country, or if you're, you know, driving a younger animal and you're just, you know, just want extra protection, the vests are great. Certainly, you know, riding, especially riding youngsters or jumping, they just offer you a lot more protection. Reflective gear, you know, I've got a reflective vest, especially when I'm riding or driving out in the fall. Just, you know, if you're in an area where you're unsure that there could be a hunter, just wearing a reflective vest. You know, they're so inexpensive, but they could really protect you, especially if you're out riding on the road. Gloves. So gloves aren't necessarily, I don't know if they're necessarily protective, but it does protect your hands against any kind of rope burn. You know, besides being proper when we are driving, they do give you a little bit of extra grip for the reins, especially since we do have such long reins when driving. And then boots, or just in general, like good solid footwear. They don't have to necessarily be a boot, but just something where you're going to feel support, ankle support. You have a closed toe. Now I am guilty. I am guilty of wearing Crocs at my barn on occasion. But, you know, you also kind of have to think about your own. You can, you know, we're all adults. We can make these decisions for ourselves. But if I am going to be doing heavy work around the horses or the ponies out driving, I do try and at least have sneakers on or some kind of more protective shoe. If I'm just doing barn work, filling water troughs, things like that, I may wear something a little less appropriate. So. And then also like reflective signs or gear, you know, you can, you know, like was mentioned, you can make your own, or you can buy, like they even have reflective gear. I think it was at Harbor Freight. I even saw something, you know, or you can even put a flag on your carriage just so that people can see you and realize that you are a slow moving vehicle. Does anyone else have anything to add or something? I didn't put things like, you know, cell phone holder on here. It's not necessarily protective gear, but it's kind of like emergency gear in case something were to happen. You know, some of us have watches where if you were to fall, your watch would, or even your phone could send an alert to make sure you're okay. So it's not necessarily protective, but it does help in the case of an emergency. Okay, and then protective gear for our horses, either shoes or hoof boots, you know, like the Cavallo shoes. have something to support their feet, especially if they are going to be walking on rocky or uneven surfaces. Certainly boots to protect their splint bones or protect their fetlocks. You know, a lot of times, you know, we'll put boots on if we're going to be doing marathon, something where they could be more likely to clip themselves. Bell boots to help protect if they've got shoes on, also helps to protect their pastern so they're not clipping themselves with their hind limb or hind legs, their hind feet. And then reflective gear, so they have everything from like little bands that you can put around their legs as little anklets. You can get reflected pieces to go around their collar or their breast collar, or like I said, you can put some reflective gear on them or just put the reflective gear on yourself. Bells. Once again, if I'm going to be riding in the woods or near the woods in the fall, I will put a bell somewhere on myself just as an alert that a person's coming. So, you know, some people will even take some sleigh bells and put them on their carriage in the fall, the winter. And then proper padding. You know, a lot of the synthetic harness does have padding built in, or you can get, you know, fleecy padding for the girth, for the saddle, for the chest, just to keep our animals more comfortable. But you just want to make sure they're not getting any rubs or sores. Anything anyone else can think to add in here? The only other thing, you know, protective gear for shipping, like you might want to have shipping boots or leg wraps, or some people will put a pole guard on if they're worried about their horse hitting their head in the trailer. You can also put a tail guard on, wrap their tail if you're worried about their tail head during travel as well.
I know they make.
I would just,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention they make a bright orange colored sheet for if you're like in the woods and you know it's hunting season. That's a really good thing to have over the horse, a sheet that's totally bright orange that can't be missed.
Yes, I have seen that. They have like, yeah, quarter sheets or.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's been covered or not, but I always pick out my horse's feet before I go anywhere with a carriage.
Yeah, that is a very.
Stones or rocks.
Yeah.
Not protective, but it's protective to him.
No, that's an amazing point. And yeah, especially, yeah, before you go out, just to make sure there's, I mean, it's good to pick their feet then anyway, to make sure there's no bruising, make sure there's no nail or screw, make sure that their feet aren't uncomfortable. And I will always do it if I'm driving where there are rocks, I'll check their feet and pick their feet out when I return as well. So that's a very good point.
And good to take a hoof pick with you in case they get a stone lodged in it and suddenly go lame.
Yes. Also a good point. I'm gonna have to add that to my spares kit now. So, has anyone?
Or a loose shoe can be very dangerous.
Yes, that did happen to me once at Nottingham Park. I was riding my old horse, and we were going through a creek, and he caught a shoe on a rock in the creek bed, and luckily he pulled the shoe off, but it could have been bad if he had just partially taken it. So you don't think about it. It was just the way he stepped in, and so.
I actually added a fence tool that has the real sharp, like the little peak in the front, and you can cut with it so that if you do have a shoe come off And I also added in, well, I've got medical stuff in mind, but also Gorilla Tape. Because then you can wrap that foot up and it'll serve you at least to your way home, if not more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then you were also asking, Michelle, if anyone has used hoof armor spares kit.
Well, the hoof armor is
Or
a liquid you can put on the horse's sole if they're barefoot or even if they're not. And it creates a protective layer. My farrier told me about it. And I've been starting to use it on Harper because the fines that are in his dry lot get along the line of, go up between the hoof and the hoof wall and create a space. And this is supposed to help keep that out of there.
Oh, so to kind of prevent like white line.
Yeah, it actually coats the sole and it's supposed to be able to, it doesn't make it, I don't know how it works, it doesn't make it waterproof, but it gives some cushion against rocks.
Okay. Yeah,
Which
there
I
are.
would use at home, but I just got his rear boots for him, though he has to wear socks with them. And I also
Computer.
I also make rhythm bells. That's something that used to, a lot of people do trails use, and it would go around the horse's neck. And it's a beaded necklace for the horse, and it's got 4 or 5 bells on it. And they come in many colors. Contact me later.
There you go, fashionable and safety. But yeah, I would just, anything that you're gonna put on their sole, as long as it's breathable, should be fine. So yeah. Cool. And then just for fun, because a lot of us do drive with dogs, myself included, I made this addition myself of, if you're going to be out, you know, if your dog's going to be out walking beside you or trotting along beside you, they do make inexpensive reflective gear for your dogs. Make sure that they have identification on, just because you never know when they're going to see a squirrel or a deer. Plus, it's just responsible dog ownership. Even if your dog is the nicest dog in the world, gets along with everyone, there are a lot of other reactive dogs out there. And if your dog is friendly and wants to run up to another dog that's on a leash, that dog may not be friendly. So I do, and if you're on your own property, that's one thing. But if you're riding out, I just like to remind people of that, because I've been in situations where I've had dogs on leashes that have not necessarily been great with other dogs, but knowing that I have restraint of my dogs, and they've been run up to before, and it puts you in a really bad position. And especially if you add horses into that mix, you don't want the horse to then get startled by a dog fight. So, but this is just a picture of me going through the woods with my little girl, who I keep her in a basket because she's handy capable. She has a bad leg. So keeping them secured is always safe for them in case you come up to an abrupt stop. She's not going to fly off the carriage. I also keep a leash on her. And there's a picture of me in my reflective vest. So.
I have a question. You have a leash on her, but she's not tied, is she?
She is not tied. I have her leash tucked into her basket.
Okay.
When I first started driving with her, I would keep the leash around my wrist, but she doesn't want to even act like she's going to jump out. But I mean, I wouldn't tie them, just because if they did come off, you don't want to drag them or get them stuck.
Exactly.
They slip
I
out.
have a little corgi that I'm going to train. She's 8 months old or 7 months old. So this fall, she's getting calmer and calmer. And this fall, but I really was thinking about that. It's like, you don't want to tie the dog.
No.
That could be terrible.
Yeah, I wouldn't tie them. I would just kind of, you know, like I said, I would keep the leash around my arm,
Yeah.
around my wrist. But now I'm at the point where I keep the leash on her. I just tuck it in below her little basket pad.
Yeah,
But
thank you, thank you.
yeah,
I was gonna ask you about that. My Jack is 17 and does have a leg issue. What do you think of the bouncing? It
I mean,
must not be too bad for them if you've got your girl out there.
yeah, I mean, she's young and does really well. I mean, you just kind of have to feel him out. But I do think if they have an issue, especially with balance, the baskets are nice, or if you have a
Definitely.
carriage, yeah. And I think we found this at like Home Goods or something.
Yeah, we used to have a basket on the tractor, and he would ride in that. He'd have a harness on
Oh,
that I could grab if I needed to, but
Yeah.
never when I was mowing.
Harnesses are good ideas, or is a good idea too. But
Yeah.
I mean, even a milk crate that you put a pad down would even work. And the
I have
carriage.
another question for where we're done.
Okay. Okay, so that's my protective gear on dogs. So now we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit into what to do in an emergency, and then we're going to talk a little bit about stable fires, which, you know, sadly, Lydia, hopefully you can share your experience a little bit more. And I think it's a good thing to learn from other people when we're talking about emergencies. But the first thing, and usually the last thing that people think about, is staying calm. So you want to stay calm. If you're flustered, if you can't have a clear mind, it's just going to set the animals into a tailspin, as well as everyone else. You always want to start with 911. 911 you could delegate to them to call a veterinarian, but always call 911, and you always want to think of the humans first. We all love our animals, but human safety is first. So always address and make sure that the humans are fine, whether it's an accident out on the trail, whether it is an accident at the barn. And it's always good to know your location. You know, if your horse is at a boarding facility, make sure that you have that address. When an emergency, you can easily find it. To tell emergency personnel, I'm at, 123 Main Street, because in an emergency, you don't want to have to fumble for the address or try and ask someone else where you are. Also, something that we use at our barn, if someone's going to go out driving or riding, especially by themselves, we try and have a system where they let someone know. So if my sister is going to go out driving while I'm at work, I'll get a message that she's sharing her location. She'll let me know when she gets hooked to go out. I'll know what direction she's going. She'll let me know when she gets back. But in the meantime, she's sharing her location. So if I'm thinking, oh, it's been an hour and a half, I haven't heard from her, I can look at that feature, that app on my phone, and say, okay, I can see where she is. She's right down the road from the barn. And usually a few minutes later, I get a message that she's returned. Also, I just want to say, at the office that I'm in right now is very dark. I'm going to try and let a little bit of light in, but I don't have a working light in this office at work. So that's a little bit better. And some of you might use this a similar feature, but I know, especially in areas where you might be the only one at your farm, it's at your house, always let someone know where you're going and kind of the direction you're going, just in case something happens. They'll know which direction to head to investigate. And then when you're calling the veterinarian, once again, know your location, know your general location. It's always nice if you're riding out to just be mindful of, okay, I'm passing this street, this road, so that if something does happen when you're out on the trail, you kind of have a general idea of what's going on. Yeah, Stephanie mentioned medical armbands. You certainly can wear them even if you're out trail riding. Certainly if you're at an event, most people will require them, or they'll at least have your information if you're in a very localized area. But yeah, armbands are great, but if you're out in an area, I know I trail ride in some more remote areas where someone might not notice me if I was out in the middle of, alongside of a cornfield. So that's why I always use my phone, take my phone with me, and try and have that. So if I needed to call for emergency help, I could say, I'm in the cornfield that's adjacent to Route 926 in the general area of, Mosquito Road. And hopefully that gives someone a general area, and then they could go come look for me. And then it's always nice, whether you're calling a veterinarian at the farm because of an injury, or if you're calling, out on the trail, like you don't have to be super specific, but is the animal bleeding? Is it not weight bearing? Do you think you have a fracture, a laceration, trouble breathing? Kind of state the main concerns so that the medical personnel, or the same thing if something happens to you, like, are you having chest pains? Was there an accident and you're bleeding? Try and give them as much information as you can so that they can bring the appropriate tools to help you. So it's much easier, to talk about this in a calm way when there isn't an emergency. But even if you just, like, as you're out trail riding, I'm one of those people that, not that I always try and think of the negative or what could happen, but I always want to have like a plan B. I want to know where I'm going. I want to know, an exit strategy, or if something happens, what I'm going to do. But certainly keeping calm will be the most helpful thing you can do. Okay, so now we're going to get into stable fires, and these are horrific, especially if you do have a barn full of animals. The big thing is to have a plan before anything happens, and that comes with as an evacuation plan or just a general plan. And it kind of comes down to, are there animals staying in the barn overnight? Are there animals in the barn where people aren't there? If you do have a vacant barn overnight or when no one's there, it may not be as important. But here at the hospital, we have what's called an evacuation box in every barn. It's very easily accessible near the front of every barn, because in an emergency, you don't want to run into the barn to get your evacuation gear. So whether we have just, like a tackle type box that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's, it's, like I said, you can tuck it right in the front of the door. You can tuck it even outside your barn, somewhere that you can easily get to. And we'll talk about some things that are going to go that you could put in that evacuation box. Fire extinguishers are really important, and having fire extinguishers that are evaluated yearly, make sure that they are working and not expired. I didn't know that fire extinguishers could expire, but they can. And then it's also good, make sure that you have an outside water source. A lot of us do have hose bibs, maybe have like an emergency hose that you could always run to get close to your barn. Have electrical systems checked regularly. If you've got a lot of things plugged into one outlet, make sure that it's not tripping the outlet, but make sure that everything is checked or inspected. You can get it inspected yearly. It's usually not a huge cost for an inspection or for someone to come out. And usually everything's fine, but if there is something that needs to be upgraded, it's better to do that before you have a problem. Avoid using too many extension cords. We are guilty of using a lot of extension cords at our barn. but we do inspect them regularly. You want to make sure that if any of the cord is exposed, if there's any pinching of the cord, if it seems like it's dried out, dispose of it, get a new one. Like I said, it's not worth having a problem over a $20 or $30 extension cord. And also make sure that your extension cords are rated for what appliance you're plugging them into, whether it be, usually we're plugging in outside water heaters, but just make sure that you're not overloading your extension cords. And if you're not using something, very simple, unplug it. If you're not using a fan, if you're not using, you know, clippers, if you're not using the radio, if you're not using something, unplug it. You know, that equipment won't be drawing energy, it won't be driving up your energy bill, but also it's one less thing to cause a problem. And then clean up unused hay, you know, not leaving piles around that could combust, especially when we have this super hot, dry weather. And then there's the debate of no smoking versus responsible smoking. Once again, we're all adults. I do know several horse people that do smoke. You want to avoid doing it in the barn. And if you do need to smoke around a farm area, just making sure that you are putting your cigarette out, and, you know, putting it in water, making sure that it is not going to cause a problem. But once again, keeping it far away from the barn. So I came across, because I just wanted to see, you know, I kind of had an idea of what we do here and that general idea. But I did find a really good article, which I put the link for down here, that came from the University of Kentucky. And it's a really great, these are kind of the, a condensed version of what the article goes over for preventing fires. Some of which we just talked about, you know, avoiding smoking, putting fire extinguishers next to the exit. You know, they do say, you know, every 30 to 40 foot interval. You know, for most normal barns, you know, you can usually get away with just 1 or 2 extinguisher unless you've got a really large facility. Cobwebs. So I like to dust cobwebs, but just cleaning off cobwebs, you know, you can get one of those telescoping brooms or dusters, or use a leaf blower, but just try and get rid of extra cobwebs or dust. Baling twine, you know, as we're cutting it off bales, you know, throw it away. If you have a little bit of a stash, that's okay. But I've walked into some barns where there's just piles and piles of baling twine sitting on the ground, and that's just, you know, it's messy, things can get tangled in it, but it is also a fire hazard. And then electrical devices, you know, if you have something that you want to, like a light or something specific, make sure it's professionally installed. If you have something that's going to be drawing a lot of power, make sure that you have, you know, correct lines, correct power source. Like I'm thinking of things like, I think it's called the hay gain, but like devices where you can soak hay for metabolic horses, things like that. Just make sure that you've got enough power to go to that. Water tank heaters and heated buckets, you know, they are going to generate heat regardless of they're full or not. So you just want to make sure that these buckets are always have water in them. In some cases with like those metal heaters that are in the large Rubbermaid troughs, you know, if those do run out of water, if they do get caught up against the side of the plastic, they will start to melt and burn through those. So just make sure that your heaters are in the center of your troughs, and that those troughs are staying full enough to offset that excessive heat and melting.
Yeah, and another good point about any electrical that's near water is to make sure those outlets have a GFCI in them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, no one needs any of that extra shock in their life.
Yeah, I have a Hay-Gain, it's not Hay-Gain, it's whatever it is, it's the steamer, the hay
Yeah,
steamer.
okay.
And yeah, the plug had gotten kind of fried by a timer, and I tried to put it directly in the outlet and it was popping the GFCI. So it was just, I thought it was still usable, but since it was popping the GFCI, I figured there's something not right about it. It's kind of dangerous. So
Yeah,
I can get that replaced.
exactly. Yeah, and you don't think about that, like, like some of the older horse vacuums and things like that. Sometimes they are a little much for some outlets, but yeah, it's not worth it. I mean, it's not worth your safety too if you've got, a plug that doesn't look right or an outlet that doesn't look right. It's always better to be safe. And once again, it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't cost that much if you've got a friend or if someone, even a handyman that can come out who understands, or even a licensed electrician, but have them come out and they can even do like a survey of what's going on in your farm, and tell you if things need upgraded or whatnot. So lights. So lighting, and you don't really think about this until you start looking up in barns, but the caged lighting is really kind of nice and important because you're less likely to they're less likely to catch fire or have things touching directly over the light. Now, they could either be a caged lighting or it could be like some areas you might have fluorescent lighting, but as long as the bulb has some protection, that also will help prevent fires. And then with hay and bedding, you want to keep that stored in kind of an isolated area away from your animals. You do also have to be really careful with, hay storage above the barn, or if there's hay in the barn and you live above the barn. And I haven't investigated these bale thermometers, but I can't imagine that they would be super expensive. And you could probably even use something that's similar to, probably a similar device that you would check your meat temperature with just a longer probe to go down into the middle of the bale. And if the temperature is 150 degrees, it should be monitored. They say if it gets up closer to 175, you really need to take precautions. And it says to contact the fire department. You might just be able to get that hay outside or hose it off, or just need to dispose of it. And then keeping tractors, fuel, gas away from the barn if you can. And if you're using a mower, try and clean any dried grass or hay. Just keeping that equipment clean before you store it. So this article has a lot of other little tidbits in there. So, it's written by a reputable source, and you're more than welcome to check that out.
When I was getting ready to build a barn, I did some research, and it suggested, of course, did I do any of this? No, but it suggested that you build like a separate building for your hay and straw, which would be great if you had the space. And if it was going to be connected, that you build like a firewall between the two, which is another great idea. But no, mine's up in the loft and my barn is wood, so go figure. But
Yeah.
there are things. Also, I was thinking while you were talking earlier, Boyd Martin had a fire, as you probably know, a couple years ago. And I remember him saying that the problem was when they were trying to slide the doors open to get the horses out, that the what are those? The railing for the doors. What am I thinking of?
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, like that keeps it, the
The
slide.
slide.
The track.
The track,
Yeah.
thank you. The track was plastic and it was melting. And so the doors, they couldn't get the doors open. They really had to, like, took two of them to like really struggle with the doors. So
Oh,
he said, you know, make sure your tracks are like metal and the balls in them are like metal if you can. But that also brought to mind, because they burned their hands, but that maybe you should keep like oven mitts somewhere close by if you're gonna run out to the barn.
Yeah.
That you could, because like, I don't know about other people, but my handles are all metal. So if I'm
Yeah.
gonna touch something, it's gonna be metal.
That's an awesome idea, and that's something that you can add into your evacuation box. So yeah, you don't think about that if your barns are closed up, and yeah, if you need to get in. Yeah, I was actually working the night that Boyd had to bring Neville in and had that horrible fire. So I'll never forget the fear and panic and loss on Boyd's face. So, but
I
Neville's
can imagine.
doing well now. So, but yeah, they're scary things. Barn fires are scary. But yeah, that's an awesome point. And yeah, these suggestions in the perfect world where you have the room and the storage and the finances are great. We don't have a separate storage area for our hay. We do use a stall that's near the exit of one of our shed rows. Our last shed row is where we keep our tractors and equipment. I mean, you try and do the best you can, but just to be cognizant of things. And even if you have containers of gasoline or diesel, especially when it gets really hot, make sure that you have your vent off, because those containers will start to expand, and you don't want to risk those exploding, and then you have gasoline or fuel in that area, and then that's going to make for a more could make for some worse consequences. So yeah, in the perfect world, this is what we do, but in the reality, we do the best with what we have. So I think that's a really good point to make. So, but in the evacuation box or kit, which we can now add oven mitts to, it'll give you an excuse to buy some new oven mitts for your house maybe. But you can also buy, even at Harbor Freight or somewhere inexpensive, you can get welder's gloves, and they work really well too, because they can withstand higher temperatures. And a lot of times you can get them with pretty good fingers, so you can have a little more, you're a little more tactile. The information here on these evacuation boxes are kind of built around what we have in our boxes here at New Bolton. Like I said, we have one for every barn. It's somewhere where we can very easily grab it and access it if, God forbid, we weren't in the barn, but we came upon a fire. So for each barn or shed row, you want to have a halter and a lead for every horse that's going to be in that barn. Having a flashlight, especially, in the winter, it gets dark so early. It's nice to have a flashlight so you can visualize what's on, or so that you can communicate with people. Blindfolds. I put this funny picture of, a horse wearing a bra as a funny blindfold, but hey, it works. Fly masks. I think people always think fly mask, like, it's funny when you see non-horse people and they're like, why are the horses blindfolded in the field? They're not blindfolded. You know, you could have a fly mask and throw something over that, but an old t-shirt, old rags, you can use to blindfold them. And we'll talk a little bit more about blindfolding, and also the fact that horses, especially if they are in the barn, they are flight animals. When they are nervous, they want to run to where they are comfortable. And if you just pull them out of a barn and let them loose, they're so panicked, they're going to want to run right back into that barn. So by blindfolding them and getting them to a safe area, you are, you know, cutting down a little bit on that anxiety. And then if you have it, like while you're buying safety vests to ride out on the trail or ride down the street, safety vests are just a few dollars. You can even get them at Walmart. Throw a few of those in there so you can be visualized in the case of an emergency. The fire extinguishers, we talked about being in the barn. You can even get those at Walmart. You know, having, like I said, that extra hosing near an outside water bib, if you have one. And then have a designated evacuation area. So this could be an open paddock. This could be a riding arena. You do have to plan it a little bit if you have an area with lots of horses that are kept in different paddocks, mares, foals. If you have a stallion, you certainly don't want to necessarily, you know, throw a stallion in the middle of the field with a bunch of mares or whatnot, but kind of have a plan for the horses that are in that, you know, these spot, like this shed row goes in this paddock, this shed row can go in the arena. Just in case something happens, you have a place to get them secured. Here, our plan is to get them to the next available barn. We do have paddocks mapped out, and we also will go through some safety drills of just, you know, God forbid there's an emergency. We have these 10 horses in the barn. Where are we going to get them? Or where are we going to get them to safety? Only once did we have an issue where we had to evacuate a barn here, and it was actually from a lightning strike, and the barn started smoking, but luckily did not catch on fire. But we did get the horses evacuated, and the fire company came and everything was okay. But you do have to think of some things that are just out of your control. You know, things happen. Hopefully you don't have to worry about your horses smoking in the barns behind your back, but yeah, but some things are just out of your control. And if you do have flashlights in your evacuation box, you do want to make sure that you're going to check them regularly, kind of like when you're doing, you know, smoke alarms, change the smoke alarm in your flashlight, or the battery in your flashlight when you're looking at smoke alarms. But something I just thought of, I don't know how many, probably more modern barns might have built-in smoke alarms. Does anyone have smoke alarms in their barn or any sprinkler systems? We do have sprinklers in some of our newer barns here. We certainly have a pretty integrated smoke alarm system, but does anyone have any in your barns?
No.
No? Yeah. I don't think.
No, but you know, the smoke alarm is a pretty good idea. I
Yeah.
don't know why we don't.
I know. I don't know if it would be, if you'd have it going off for, like, I don't know if dust would set it off, but
Yes,
Probably. And bugs.
yes,
Yeah.
dust was the biggest thing, sometimes spider webs. Because I called about it, and companies, especially the fire company, doesn't like it because if it's hooked up to them, they get all these bogus calls.
yeah.
I have the barn I was running, I put, there were some cameras in it, and I put more cameras in. And I
Okay.
would be checking those. Plus the house was right beside the barn. So
Okay.
I wasn't living there, but
Nice.
it was good to have.
Yeah, that is a good
Cameras.
point.
The cameras are great if you're not close to the barn, and they're not difficult to run. Sometimes the systems can be a little funky, but we got 4 cameras and the system for $450. And you just have to have Wi-Fi to run it off of.
Gotcha.
So that was really great, because I'd wake up in the middle of the night a couple of times and I'd just look at the barn.
Yeah, gives you peace of mind.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that is a good idea. Cool. All good thoughts. So protocol for evacuating, only get the horses out if you can get into the barn without risking human life. Now, we all turn into completely different irrational people when you are in, even though we're supposed to stay calm, in the face of an emergency. We love our animals, but you're nothing if you run into that barn and it's your life and your horse's life. So just be very, very cautious going into a situation like that. As soon as the fire department or emergency people get there, stand back, let them do their job. They know how important pets and animals are during fires. They go through a lot of training for this as well. Some of the local fire department even comes out and they will do drills here on our facility. So they know, they get it, but they will not let people risk their own lives. So just something to remember. If you can safely get in the barn, you want to take the horses that are closest to the exit first. Handle one at a time. I know you just want to run in and like gangbusters, grab as many as you can, but you really want to keep one at a time. These guys are going to be stressed. They're flight animals. They are going to be, even the calmest horse is going to be that flight response is going to be elevated. So have a halter on them, try and have some kind, or even a lead around them, and get them to the safest paddock or separate barn. Like areas like the Fair Hill Training Center, that's an example where they might, now luckily with their last barn fire, there were no horses in the training center at the time, but they could move those horses into another barn there at the training center. And it would be interesting to hear, talk to maybe Dr. Anderson or Dr. Arnsberg and see if they have any kind of evacuation policy or emergency policy for things like the fire that they had not long ago. And make sure that you keep control of the animal of the horse until it gets into that paddock and or gets into a safe stall. If you just, open the door, let these horses run loose, like I said, they are going to be so likely to just turn around and run right back into that burning building. Like I said, they are running on fear, adrenaline, full flight response, and a lot of the animals that succumb to these fires are ones that were safe that people let loose. And if you can, you don't want, if you have horses that are used to each other, they're used to being in a paddock together, kind of keeping them where they can see other animals will also help with their stress level. So there's a lot of variables to think about, which is why you said, just to sit down and kind of write up a plan of what if you think about it and plan for it, hopefully it won't happen, but you don't want to think about all of this in the middle of an emergency. So other key points, once again, stay calm, really make sure that you're not going to be screaming or yelling. You know, we all know that horses pick up on our body language. They pick up on our feelings. So if you're scared and nervous, they are going to be scared and nervous. If you can try and at least stay steady, have a steady tone, they're likely to, you know, to follow you, come with you, because if you're yelling and screaming, they're going to want to get away from you too. So, and once again, I can't stress enough, but human life is going to be number one. Think of, you know, anyone that, especially if it's a barn fire where there's someone living in an apartment off the barn or above the barn, make sure you get them out before you even start thinking about the horses. Call 911 first, get the emergency vet on the line. And once again, don't let them run loose. When the emergency personnel get there, stand out of their way. You can offer help, but usually they know exactly what they need to do. They're going to work well together. They know you want your animals out of the barn. So just let them do their job. And it's also good too, in your area, talk to the local fire companies and say, you know, hey, this is my farm. A lot of times the volunteer firemen or even the staff firefighters will come out to your barn and they could even tell you some things that you can do to make it safe. Plus inviting them out to, even if you have a larger facilities like we do at New Bolton, say, this is our layout. If we had a fire, this is our plan. This is our evacuation box. You can even give them a copy of your evacuation procedure, give them a copy of important numbers with your veterinarian. They're happy to have that information. So, and then, and also if you have boarders or certainly people living on the property, make sure that everyone there is aware of the plan. It's good to have it in writing, posted somewhere near the barn or in your evacuation box. And this up here is just another example of blindfolding. Like I said, you can use old t-shirts, tuck it inside the halter, just so that you can avoid a lot of that anxiety. So, but just staying calm, leading them out of the barn, getting them to a safe spot, and not just letting them go. And certainly we talked about Boyd Martin and Neville Bardos, who survived the barn fire. This woman wrote a really nice story several years ago, 2009, which seems like it was just yesterday. This mare Suki came in from a pretty devastating barn fire. This was her, I want to say it's up in the Glenmore area. And this mare actually boarded with a friend of mine after the fire, but you can see, and this is her now, you can see that the tips of her ears were burnt off. Her back was severely burnt. Her head was severely burnt. This mare took a long time and a lot of supportive care, a lot of creams and ointments. She did survive. She is comfortable. And she actually does a lot of therapy work with especially children that have been the victim of house fires. So Suki's a really good ambassador for these kids that are disfigured from burns, have low self-esteem, they've been through a lot of pain. They can interact with this mare, and it's helped so many children. It's a really endearing story, but sad that, you know, she was a victim of this fire to get to this point. But you can go on Google or search this story, and it's a pretty cool story. And that is it. That is all I have as far as slides. I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully I got all the key points from the from the CAA outline. Like I said, some of it's very basic, some of it we know we deal with on a routine basis, especially cleaning stalls if you've got horses inside. It's something a lot of us learned at an early age, but it's good to share ideas. And like some people don't use a pitchfork, they use a snow shovel. Hey, whatever works. Recycled paper works just as well as anything you can get from the pet store. But I think with the safety piece, it is really nice to have a plan, and it's something you don't think about on the good days, but something you wish that you had thought about. God forbid something happened. So
This was great, Jamie. It was very comprehensive, and as usual, you did a great job. Your knowledge is really appreciated that you're sharing it with us.
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.